It's April 12th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the U.S. Japan-Philippines summit in Washington, D.C. The three countries are holding their first ever summit in a bid to foster their defense and economic cooperation. There, U.S. President Joe Biden said his country's defense commitments to Japan and the Philippines remain ironclad in the face of regional security challenges. President Yoon vowed to reform his conservative administration after the main opposition Democratic Party's landslide victory in Wednesday's general election. Most of the president's senior aides, including the prime minister, expressed their intent to resign. An international tribunal has ordered South Korea to pay $32 million in compensation to U.S.-based hedge fund Mason Capital in an investor state suit the company filed over a controversial 2015 merger of two Simpson affiliates. The U.S. is hosting Japan and the Philippines in Washington to solidify their trilateral ties and explore ways to keep China in check. In fact, the three sides have just issued a joint statement expressing great concerns over China's aggression in the South China Sea. Our Choi Soo-hyung starts us off.
Today, we mark a historic moment, the first ever leaders' summit between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines. And it's truly an honor to have you both here as we begin this new era of partnership.
The United States, Japan, and the Philippines have held their first trilateral summit. On Thursday local time in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Joe Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and the President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., agreed on cooperation for peace in the Indo-Pacific, including countering China. President Biden said the U.S. would activate its mutual defense treaty with the Philippines if there is an attack on Philippines aircraft, ships, or military forces in the South China Sea. This statement comes amid China's pressure over some of the islands under the Philippines' sovereignty in the region. Biden also mentioned promoting investment in facilities such as ports and railways connecting Manila and Subic Bay Port.
It is a partnership born not out of convenience nor of expediency, but as a natural progression of a deepening relation and robust cooperation amongst our three countries, linked by a profound respect for democracy, good governance, and the rule of law.
The U.S. is building a new framework with key Asian allies to counter China. This includes forming a lattice-like network, which includes last year's trilateral summit between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, known as the Camp Davis Summit, as well as the AUKUS, trilateral security partnership between the U.S., UK, and Australia, and the Quad, which includes the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida said that Japan would actively support the U.S.
I'm here to say that Japan is already standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States. You are not alone. We are with you.
Also, new initiatives countering China's Belt and Road Initiative will be announced for joint investments in energy security, economy, and maritime cooperation and other areas. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Again, this is the first time ever that the leaders of the three countries are putting their heads together and have arranged such a meeting. Let's discuss more with Chris Keskeho from Voice of America. Welcome back, Chris.
Good to be with you.
So how did the idea for this summit come out?
Well, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said in Tuesday's briefing that the seeds of this trilateral summit were planted in Tokyo last June when Sullivan met with his Filipino and Japanese counterparts, and they agreed to enhance the partnership. According to White House East Asia official Mira Rep Hooper, these three countries share a joint vision for the future of the region because they're all democracies, and the time was right for a leader-level summit, Dami.
Right, then we have to talk about what roles Japan and the Philippines are expected to play here, especially for the Philippines, considering it's a new addition.
Right. So first, let's talk about Japan. Japan has 50,000 U.S. troops stationed in its country, but command and control is in Hawaii. Now, the U.S. and Japan committed on Wednesday to better coordinate their military command and control with some reforms. The specifics of yet have it to be announced. And the Philippines is also a key part of U.S. defense strategy in the region. There are no permanently stationed U.S. troops there, but the U.S. and the Philippines have a mutual defense treaty that dates back to 1951, rather. In 2023, they agreed upon 4 additional sites under the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, to provide additional staging capacity for U.S. military, where U.S. troops rotate their presence no more than 10,000 at a given time. The Philippines also needs to retrofit its military assets. So to that end, the U.S. Senate has proposed $2.5 billion in grants over the next 5 years to help Manila purchase weapons from Washington. And this is all an effort to discourage China from its so-called gray zone tactics, like firing water cannons, shining military-grade lasers at especially Filipino vessels in the last few weeks.
Right, so it's highly likely that trilateral meeting will launch a new, or has launched a new security architecture for, especially for the Indo-Pacific, countering China and its growing aggression. What will that mean for South Korea and also for the Korean Peninsula?
Well, Japanese PM Kishida said last week that he hopes there will be more unity in deterring China from resorting to military action to resolve its regional disputes. Japan and Washington have said this coordination is critical to guaranteeing a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, there's also a role for Japan to play in trying to meet with Kim Jong-un. Biden says Kishida's efforts in that regard are, quote, a good thing. And that's because Washington has not been able to open any lines of communication with Pyongyang.
Definitely, and it was actually the first time that Biden showed support for Japan's outreach to North Korea. Now, Chris, I'm sure the trilateral summit on Thursday will get on China's nerves, right?
Naturally, and it already has in anticipation of the bilateral meeting between the U.S. and Japan. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said on Monday, "We oppose cobbling together exclusive groupings and stoking bloc confrontation in the region." And the Chinese embassy in the U.S. told VOA over email they wanted to underscore that interstate cooperation should not target a third party. Such practices, patching up small blocs, stirring up confrontation under the excuse of cooperation, upholding peace and order in name, but flexing military muscle and stoking chaos in nature, do not meet the trend for peace and development and run counter to the regional countries' shared aspirations for stability and development. But National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan of the U.S. says that the President Biden has said that these alliances are not designed against any countries, but they are more in favor of a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Right, and what China argues, and some analysts point out, is skepticism over whether this trilateral effort between U.S., Japan, and the Philippines will actually, stick and hold up. Is that likely to be so?
Well, certainly the case is that people think that there might be uncertainty because leaders in the democratic countries will change going forward. We know that President Biden's opponent in November, former President Donald Trump, has favored a bilateral rather than multilateral approach to his own foreign policy, and that was how he operated when he was in the White House several years ago. Now, the U.S. is not the only nation holding elections. Japan has them in September. And of course, South Korean President Yoon already has less political margin in your country since his party lost seats in this week's parliamentary elections. And now for the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is limited to one 6-year term that ends in June of 2028.
That is right. All right, Chris, thank you so much for the report today. We appreciate it as always.
Good to be with you again.
Following the general election results, President Yoon said he humbly accepts the will of the people and promised changes to his conservative administration. Plus, most of the president's senior aides also expressed their will to step down. Our correspondent Oh Seung reports.
Nearly all senior aides to President Yoon have offered to resign along with the Prime Minister as the administration humbly accepts the results of the general election that dealt a crushing blow to the ruling party. Yoon's Chief of Staff Lee Kwan-suk briefed reporters Thursday morning, conveying the President's remarks that he will respect the will of the people expressed in Wednesday's election. He pledged to do his best to reform the running of state affairs and stabilize the economy and people's livelihoods. A senior official hinted that such a reform would first involve an all-out overhaul of Yoon's top aides. Most have expressed their intent to resign: the Chief of Staff for Policy, and all senior secretaries, including those in charge of political affairs, the economy and press relations. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who has been playing a leading role in domestic affairs, told the President he intends to step down. The inevitable list of figures resigning excludes those in the National Security Council, as they deal with the nation's security and foreign policy strategy. With 3 years left in office, Yoon faces an uphill battle in pushing through major policy initiatives to reform labour, education and pensions, as well as cut tax and subsidise key industries such as semiconductors. Efforts to communicate and persuade the opposition and the larger public remain an ever vital task. When asked whether the top office would engage with the opposition to win their cooperation on bills related to the economy and people's livelihoods, the senior aide indicated that would be the case. The official added that the President has considered Wednesday's general election as the public's evaluation of his handling of state affairs, and that the presidential office will reflect upon the outcome. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea's Monetary Policy Committee is holding its third monetary policy meeting of the year at this hour to decide whether to adjust the base interest rate, which currently stands at 3.5%. Now, experts say the BOK is likely to freeze the base interest rates again, citing unstable prices. The consumer price index hovered above the 3% range for 2 consecutive months in February and March due to high agricultural and global oil prices. If the Monetary Policy Committee decides to keep the rates unchanged, it will mark the 10th consecutive rate freeze. An international tribunal has ordered the South Korean government to pay $32 million in compensation to Mason Capital, a U.S.-based hedge fund. Now, the move comes amid an investor state suit the company filed over a controversial 2015 merger of 2 Samsung affiliates. Lee Seung-jae has more.
6 years after the U.S.-based hedge fund Mason Capital filed an investor state suit against the South Korean government over a controversial 2015 merger of 2 Samsung affiliates, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands on Thursday ordered South Korea to pay $32 million in compensation. However, the ruling is just a fraction of the $200 million the New York-based fund has demanded. In fact, despite including interest on delayed payments, it represents just 16% of what Mason Capital requested. In a 2015 merger of Samsung C&T and Cheil Industries, a ratio of 0.35 Cheil shares was offered for every 1 Samsung C&T share. The hedge fund held a 2.18% share in Samsung C&T at the time and strongly objected to the merger, arguing that it undervalued Samsung C&T shares. In 2018, Mason filed a lawsuit saying that the South Korean government had unfairly intervened in favor of the merger. The controversial merger has since been at the center of a huge corruption scandal that led to the imprisonment of Samsung heir Lee Jae-yong and the eventual ousting and conviction of former President Park Geun-hye. Mason cited the results of the special investigation into corruption in state affairs, saying that it was clear evidence that the Korean government violated procedures to promote the interests of Chairman Lee's family, calling it the largest political corruption scandal in Korean history. It added that the Park administration exerted excessive influence on the state-run National Pension Service, a major shareholder in Samsung C&T, to cast its vote in favor of the merger. However, the South Korean government argued that while it's true that the former president accepted a bribe and was impeached and imprisoned for it, the bribe was received after the merger, adding that the National Pension Service is an independent corporation that's not part of the Korean government. The latest ruling marks the second time the South Korean government has been ordered to pay compensation over the controversial 2015 merger, as the PCA ordered the government to pay $53.59 million plus interest to U.S.-based hedge fund Elliott Investment Management in June 2023. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's auto exports for the first 3 months of this year rose to a new all-time high for the period, mainly thanks to the eco-friendly cars. Park Gun-woo has the details.
South Korea has recorded a record-breaking Q1 for automobile exports in terms of value. According to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday, total exports came to $17.5 billion, or nearly 24 trillion won, up 2.7% on year. The value of outbound shipments in March alone rebounded to just under $6.2 billion after a drop of $1.05 billion was recorded in February from the month before. The rise was mainly attributed to growth in hybrid vehicles. The value of hybrid car exports in March jumped 37% on year to a record high $0.85 billion. In terms of domestic sales of hybrid cars, more than 40,000 units were sold in March, an on-year increase of 23.6%, despite domestic sales of all vehicles falling by 12% last month. Sales of electric vehicles were also up by 15.5% on year, with total domestic sales of so-called green cars up 18.6% last month. And 365,000 cars were produced in March, higher than 2023's monthly average of 354,000, but down 10% from the same month last year. The industry ministry said decreased production was due in part to fewer working days and construction at one of Kia's factories. The industry ministry also said it would work to ensure a robust performance for the auto industry in 2024 to mirror last year, when outbound shipments worth nearly $71 billion were seen. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Si-young, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin today in Ukraine, where a major power plant near Kyiv was destroyed by Russian airstrikes early on Thursday. The thermal power plant was among several energy facilities in various regions of Ukraine hit by missiles and drones. The destroyed Trilateral coal-fired thermal power plant, operated by a domestic energy company, Centrenergo, was one of Ukraine's largest providers of electricity and heat. Centrenergo chairman Andrei Hota said that the airstrikes destroyed 100% the transformer, the turbines, the generators, adding that the scale of destruction is terrifying. At least 2 more thermal power plants were reported to have suffered significant damage from the airstrikes. Ukraine's Air Force said that they took down 18 missiles and 39 drones out of 82 missiles and drones used by Russia in the attack. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on the same day that Russia was obliged to respond following Kyiv's attacks on Russia's infrastructure. A Vietnamese billionaire real estate tycoon was sentenced to death in Ho Chi Minh City on Thursday after being found guilty of fraud worth tens of billions of US dollars over an 11-year period. In what Vietnam's state media is calling the country's largest financial fraud case ever, 67-year-old Song My Lan was accused of fraudulently acquiring $44 billion in loans for herself and her aides from the Saigon Commercial Bank. Thursday's verdict also requires her to return $27 billion. Her lawyers have 15 days to appeal the verdict. 10 state prosecutors and over 6 tons of evidence were used in the trial, while 2,700 witnesses were summoned to testify. 85 others were on trial alongside Song My Lan. All were found guilty, with sentences ranging from suspended jail terms to life imprisonment. The former interpreter of Japanese baseball star Shohei Ohtani was charged with bank fraud on Thursday for stealing over $16 million from the Los Angeles Dodgers player. Issei Mizuhara allegedly helped Ohtani to set up a bank account from which Mizuhara is accused of sending millions in funds to an illegal sports gambling operation. Bank fraud carries a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison. Previously, Ohtani told reporters at a press conference on March 25th that he had never bet on baseball or paid a bookmaker, saying that he was a victim of Mizuhara. Ohtani signed a contract, a $7 million 10-year contract with the Dodgers in the current season. However, federal investigators have reportedly not found any evidence of Mizuhara placing bets on baseball games. Former U.S. football star and actor O.J. Simpson, who was acquitted of the murder of his former wife in a 1995 trial, died at the age of 76 on Wednesday at his home in Las Vegas. One of the most popular American athletes in the 1960s and 70s, and nicknamed the Juice Simpson, was reportedly undergoing prostate cancer treatment. He began as a star running back at the University of Southern California and won the Heisman Trophy before being drafted as Buffalo Bills' #1 draft pick. Simpson played 11 seasons of professional American football, but became a controversial figure after he was charged with the stabbing deaths of his ex-wife and her friend in 1994. In 2008, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for armed robbery and kidnapping.
Good morning. We are expecting an early taste of summer this weekend. By Sunday, Seoul will see a high of 28 degrees Celsius, but unlike southern provinces, will not be as hot as Seoul. Sunny skies in store for most places with warms, except on Jeju, as rain is in the forecast on Sunday. Morning temperatures will also be warmer than norm, so beware of wide temperature gaps. Yesterday's sprinkle didn't help much to ease the dryness in the air. A dry advisory remains in place in the east of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do, so please stay alert against wildfires. Now the question is, along with the summer warmth, will there be an air quality issue? Other than Incheon and the south of Gyeonggi-do, the rest of the country will have decent air quality. Sunny skies expected for most places except on Jeju with a high of 21 degrees, while Seoul will be topping out at 24 degrees Celsius. This weekend's June warms will ease next week with nationwide rain in the forecast. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next Monday at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.